Hello, everybody. We're just waiting about 1 minute until we get started. Thank you for being here. Go ahead and just put your name in the chat or just say hey, and we'll get started in 1 minute. Glad that you're here. I know it's a Saturday afternoon, probably hopefully where you are. It's a beautiful day outside. It is here in Colorado, but we are getting some work done with multiple choice practice. My name is Kevin Steinhauser. If you have been with me this year, I've done one or two. This is my second actually stream. Miss Kirk is doing a lot of the other streams. So again, if you have any questions for me, would love to answer them today. So you can drop a question in the chat. We'll give it about 1 more minute till we get started. Hey, Brandon, thanks for being here today. Hope you're doing well. Brandon's our TA. He's been in, I think, like all of these streams, so he's a great resource as well. He'll be helping out with the chat. I'll be able to pull up the chat as well. We're on a little bit of a delay, so if you heard like some awkward silence at the beginning, just making sure we're ready to go. I think we're good. So I'm going to give it about 30 seconds as a few more people are logging in, and we will get started. I'm glad you're here. We are going to be pretty interactive today, and I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you the plan here as soon as we get started. Again, about me, if this is your first stream with me, these streams, he's a great resource as well. He'll be helping out with the chat. I'll be able to pull up the... Sorry, a little reverb on my end. You might have just heard my voice echoing. Okay, so a little bit about me. I have been teaching AP language for the last 10 years, and I've been with Fiveable for the last, I believe, 3. Really excited to do these streams. I'm really passionate about multiple choice. So that's why when Miss Kirk and I were dividing and conquering this semester, I was like, hey, I really want to do these multiple choice streams. So again, glad that you are here. Let's get right into it. The reason why I'm so passionate about multiple choice, I'll talk about here in a moment. But mainly, it's hard to teach because really it's just all about deliberate practice. But I want to give you some tips and tricks today. And just some really good deliberate practice time together. So we will be annotating a passage together. There's 8 questions we're going to get to today. So for those 8 questions, we are going to be, I'll have some polls set up, and you're going to be like voting on which answer choice you think it is. So again, if you are with us, be ready to be pretty hands-on today. All right, let's get started. Just a reminder that if you're using the chat, I might call you out by name on this, and we will be uploading these for even students next year to look at. So hopefully that's no stress, but just remember that we are recording these. Just a reminder. 3 in the next 15 days, 3 more streams coming up. The next one is actually just in a few days. I think this is April 14th, is a Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're only doing 2 multiple choice streams for this CRAM session. And then we'll be covering for the big CRAM finale the day before your AP exam. Ms. Kirk and I will both be there. Brandon will be there as well, helping out. And we'll be talking about multiple choice for part of that time. But the only 2 fully dedicated multiple choice streams are today and then Wednesday. So I'm hosting that stream on Wednesday. If you're here today, I highly hope you can come back, because today we're doing the reading type of questions. On Wednesday, we're doing the composition type of questions. And those 2 together make up your multiple choice practice and components. After that, Ms. Kirk is coming in with some synthesis practice on April 20th. I'll be back on April 24th with some rhetorical analysis practice. I did a rhetorical analysis stream a couple weeks ago, and Miss Kirk has done one in between then and now. So we're kind of tag teaming, like I said. But let's get into today's stream. So the first few minutes, I'll talk about the multiple choice overview. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. I want to make sure everyone's feeling good about what to expect. And then we'll spend most of the time reading an AP reading passage and then practicing answering some multiple choice questions. So that's when we'll get pretty hands-on. The first few minutes will just be me kind of going over, making sure we're all on the same page. If there's any clarifying questions, feel free to drop that into the chat. So the very first part of your exam, no matter if you're taking it on May 12th or later, May 26th is the second session. There's 3 sessions total. No matter what format, if you're online, if you're in person, the first hour will be multiple choice. You'll have 45 questions, and that makes up 45% of your exam score. Now, I can't tell you yet, because nobody knows, it's kind of a mystery, what you need on multiple choice to get a 3, 4, or 5 on the actual exam. Obviously, your essays are a big factor into that. So your 3 essays will make up 55% of your score. And we can kind of tell you, hey, if you get a 4 out of 6 on the rubric for each of those essays, you'll at least get a 3 on the exam. Obviously, caveated with multiple choice still matters. So last year, or actually, before last year, all we had was reading multiple choice questions. So that's the type of questions we're going to practice today. Then you had to get just a little bit over 50% of the questions right to qualify for a 3, as long as your essays were kind of on that same track. I don't know if it's going to be a little bit different this year, just because they do take the cut scores based on the international student performance. So this is kind of like the big experiment. How will students do? And then they'll take cut scores. So I would say a good goal as we're practicing and as you're practicing on your own, shoot for 60% or higher. And that's just kind of my guess. That's not a guarantee by any means. But that's a good goal, and we'll see how you do from that. And that would be to get a 3 is just kind of my inferencing here. So maybe just a little bit higher than it's been in the past would be required for a 3. And the reason for that, come back next Wednesday when we talk about composition. I think students have been doing really well on those. So I think across the board, we'll have a little bit higher success on multiple choice. So that means we just got to do a little bit better to stay ahead of like that national, international curve. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. I can help out if there's any clarifying questions today. Another reason why I think we'll do better is because of timing. We used to have in AP language 55 questions, and we had a full hour. Now they haven't decreased the time, but there's 10 less questions. So let's talk about how these 45 questions will be broken down. It's pretty much half and half. 20 to 23 questions will be reading questions, like the one we're going to practice today. 20 to 22 questions are going to be composition questions, like the ones that we'll practice together on Wednesday. Now, if you're familiar with the SAT, it's actually pretty aligned to that. So a lot of you are juniors who've been practicing for the SAT this year. The good news is, if you're practicing for the SAT, you're practicing for AP language and vice versa. The questions are not exactly the same, but the skills that they're developing are very similar. So the reading questions, our questions today, are most likely going to be in the form of 2 nonfiction passages. So we're going to see one of those sample passages today. That's like the SAT reading. So you're going to read the passage, you're going to read it well, and then you have some just comprehension and analysis questions, and we'll sample some of those today. And then what we'll come back for on Wednesday are those composition questions. If you're used to the SAT, that's the type of question where you just have to edit and revise someone else's writing. Now, these questions of both types are certainly harder than any ACT or SAT practice that you have. The reason for that, SAT, ACT measure college readiness. AP language measures college level success. So you have to be at the college level of a reader and writer to get credit on this exam. So certainly we're going to see some tougher questions. When it comes to the composition questions, I'll spend a lot more time next Wednesday, just in a few days, talking about those and looking at some sample questions. Those are going to be more focused on the overall flow of the writer's line of reasoning. And you should know that little buzzword by now if you've been with AP language. Line of reasoning, just the flow of thought. Each sentence logically builds from the next to create an overall argument. Today, we're going to focus on the first type, reading questions. So we're going to do one of those 2 nonfiction passages. You're going to have 2. They're going to be kind of lengthy. Let's talk about what we're going to do today and then when you take the real deal. By the way that the exam is set up, the first half of multiple choice will be the one from today, the reading passages, and then it'll transition right into those 3 shorter passages that you'll revise, those composition practice questions or actual questions. So today, for both of the first 2 passages, your task is to read and analyze. You're only going to be dealing with nonfiction texts in AP language. So again, they'll give you 2. Those questions will be divided pretty close to equal. So you might get like 10 questions on one, 11 questions on the next, or 11 on one, 12 on the next. But it's going to be breaking down, like I said, to 23 to 25 questions total. And the recommended time that we at Fiveable recommend, spend 17 or 18 minutes per passage. That includes reading, annotating, figuring out what the text is all about, and then jumping into the questions. We highly recommend reading the passage first with one goal in mind: understand the text. Some teachers might say, hey, look at the questions first and kind of go back and forth, or like go search for the answers. We've just seen with most students that we've worked with, if you read the text well, the questions will start to fall in line. Now, timing does matter. So that would take maybe 7 or 8 minutes to quickly but effectively read the passage, and then 7 or 8 minutes to, or a little bit more, I guess, like 8 or 9 minutes each. So 8 or 9 minutes to read the passage, 8 or 9 minutes to answer the questions. So just about half. You're going to spend at that point like 35, 36 minutes on the first 2 sections. That makes sense. If you think back, a little bit more than half of the questions will come from the first 2 nonfiction passages. So spending a little bit more, more than half of the time makes total sense. But also, we got to invest the time up front in those actual readings. So that is the game changer between looking at the questions and looking for the answers versus just read the text well and then quickly go through the questions. That is what we strongly advise. So that's what we're going to practice today. The composition questions, which is part 2 of this reading, do go a lot quicker because the passages are just so much shorter. So again, you want to spend a little bit more than half of your 60 minutes on these 2 first nonfiction passages. Again, that's 17 or 18 minutes per passage. Half the time reading, half the time quickly answering those questions. So let's talk about how to approach each of these 2 nonfiction texts that you'll have. So first, they will always have background info, like a 2 or 3 sentence blurb at the very beginning. Make sure you read that. Before you even read, take like 10 seconds to just think about what you know about the topic. So today we're going to read about women's suffrage movement. College Board loves that topic. That's maybe the women's rights and women's suffrage might be the most frequent topic for multiple choice passages. So that makes sense if we're going to practice it today. And you could have one on it on the real deal. Now, I believe, by the way, there's 3 different iterations of the test this year. My understanding is that there's going to be different multiple choice passages for each one. So if you take it on May 26th, there's no advantage. You're not going to be like, oh, let me try to text my friend who took it on May 12th so I can like read up on that topic. No, you'll just have a different topic. So again, you're coming in with a fresh slate. College Board's really good at choosing topics where you might have some background knowledge in it, but you've probably never read the actual work. So today, we're going to read about women's rights. You've read about the women's suffrage movement plenty of times probably, but you've probably never read this passage. So again, just be ready for that. You may or may not know about the topic. It's very unlikely that you've read the passage before, and that's their goal, right? So you're not going to be seeing "I Have a Dream" speech by Martin Luther King. They know you probably read that. And like I've been preaching about, read to comprehend, not to answer the questions. Again, 7 or 8 minutes, maybe even up to 9 minutes to read well. I just call that investing your time into the comprehension. You will do so much better if you take 7, 8, 9 minutes to read the passage as opposed to just like quickly going through it and then taking your time with the questions. The questions will go a lot quicker if you have a strong understanding of the passage. And then step 3 is annotate. We're going to talk about that here in 1 minute. Let me pause to answer a question in the chat. So the question is, will we have access to all of the questions attached to one passage on the digital exam? Let me make sure I'm understanding that question. I think I do. Gregor, message me in the chat if I'm not answering this question. I'm just thinking about making sure I understand what you're asking. So I'm not 100% sure what the exam is going to look like, but my understanding, if you do take it digitally, is that it's going to be like AP Classroom. And I actually was going to take a moment to talk about that here before we get into it. So if you practice on AP Classroom, and I hope that you have, I hope that you're able to, I'll talk about that in a second. But on AP Classroom, every single question has the passage right up top. And then, you answer number one, you click next, you answer that, you click next, you answer that, you click next, etc. So the big thing with that is you do want to make sure you're taking your time on that first question for the passage, reading well, even though number one's like right underneath. We'll have to get a little bit more clarity. We'll have more clarity for you by May 11th in terms of College Board. There's a little bit of confusion from College Board on how easy it's going to be to go like back to check your answers. So I just got to get a little bit more clarity from them. I don't have a solid answer for you today on will you be able to go back and forth easily. But my understanding for like just the way that it's presented is that every question will have the passage at the top and then just one question at a time, like think of it as like per slide, because you'll have to like click next every question. That's my understanding, which is kind of nice because you won't have to do like a million scrolling, kind of like we'll practice today. Now, if you are doing pencil paper, they do a pretty good job of like reprinting the passage so you don't have to be flipping back and forth. But I actually recommend be okay flipping back and forth if you're pencil paper. That way you annotate once and you can lean on your annotations to save you time. I'm a big believer, so I preach this in my classroom all the time, and my students who annotate do a lot better than they do like without annotating. Very, very much is the trend. So let's talk about annotating. But Gregor, if you have a follow-up question for me, let me know. I appreciate anyone who has a question, just ask me in the chat. Let's talk about AP Classroom actually first before we talk about annotating. So AP Classroom is the absolute best way to practice after today, or before today. It's the best resource out there. So today's practice passage I pulled from, it's a free resource. We're just going to practice it together. It's from the course exam description. There's only one passage that's free and available to the public. So that's what we're using today. And then we'll use the CED, the course exam description, for composition questions next week. So it's possible if you've looked at that there's a little overlap today, but we'll talk through this. We'll read it together. We'll work on these questions together. Again, it's a free resource, so it's possible you've seen this before. But the ones that I really would push you to is AP Classroom. It's weird, but you can only be in AP Classroom if you're at a school enrolled in the course. So I know a lot of people at Fiveable work with us who don't have AP language in the classroom. And a lot of you have it and are using this as like an awesome study tool or like extra layer of learning. So if you do not have, unfortunately, this is just the rule. If you don't have access to AP Classroom, we at Fiveable cannot get you access. So you'd have to pick up for just extra practice. We can't run through it because these are for-profit test companies, but you have to pick up like a 5 Steps to a 5 or Princeton Review, an AP language study book, just to get some more AP multiple choice practice questions. We will have some new practice questions only exclusive to Fiveable on May 11th. That's almost a month away, when Miss Kirk and I do that big 5-hour CRAM finale. So her and I are putting together some practice questions only at Fiveable, but that's when we're going to be revealing and practicing those. So between now and May 11th, the best way to practice is AP Classroom. If you don't have access to AP Classroom, you'll have to pick up a book if you want to get some extra multiple choice practice in, and I highly recommend it. So we're going to like practice really well today, and then you'll practice more on your own, hopefully in the next month. I'd say, hey, depending on what you're doing in school, like 1 or 2 practice passages a week would be perfect. That'd be great. Okay, with that said, if your AP language teacher has not used AP Classroom much, talk to him or her about that and be like, hey, there's some great multiple choice resources on AP Classroom. Can you open them up for me to log in and practice? If they have, great. Just make sure you're putting in that practice. Anytime your teacher says, hey, I've opened up like 3 practice passages, it's optional. Hey, that's the best way to get better, is to go in and practice. So take advantage of those free College Board resources. And if your teacher hasn't been using it, no stress. It's optional for teachers to use, but just be like, hey, I'd love to get extra practice. It's pretty easy for teachers to open up that practice access for that student, for their students. So yeah, let's keep going into annotations now. If you are taking this digitally, or if you're taking it in person on May 12th, I want you to annotate, because again, annotations are there to save you time. Let's talk about annotations. Annotations are important for two reasons. One, you're going to go back during the questions and quickly just be able to look at your annotations and be like, okay, I remember what this paragraph is about. The timing matters. So you don't have time to read the passage twice. You don't want to have to do that. So you're just jotting down some key like main ideas for each paragraph or each chunk of text as you go to save you time. And the second reason why this matters is to hold you accountable to the text. If you can't annotate, that means you don't know what the text says. And that's not me being critical. That happens to the best readers because these texts can get pretty difficult. So that's just a red flag. Oh crap, I got to go back and reread that because I don't know what to write. I don't actually know what's going on. So A, it saves you time in the multiple choice round. And maybe even more importantly, B, it holds you to a high standard of comprehension. Worst case scenario is you get to the end of the passage and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no clue what this is about. Your annotations, if you stop at least every paragraph, you're going to catch that early. You're not going to waste 6 minutes reading for no reason because you're reading for no reason if you don't know what the text says, right? So you're going to have to slow down a little bit. If you need to go back and reread a paragraph, just do the best you can. Now, if you've reread it 2 or 3 times and you're like, I still don't know what to annotate, pick out the parts that you do understand and move on because there might be a text that's like, man, this is super, super tough. But for most students, a second reread really is helpful and all you need to be able to annotate and move on successfully. So let's talk about what you should do as you annotate. So if you're doing pencil paper, and I do have to kind of talk about both, actually literally underline or circle key phrases that will just ground you. So maybe like the most important sentence or the simplest to understand for a really tough paragraph, underline or circle that so you can like go back and look at it if you need to during the question and answer phase. Pay particular attention to all the shifts in topic and tone. What I mean by that is you're going to see, depending on the text, some really long paragraphs. If there's a paragraph that's 40 lines long, don't wait till you've read 40 lines to annotate. Anytime there's a shift in topic or tone, even if it's mid paragraph, mark it. So if the author goes from like critical to unifying, like that's a really common thing we see in AP language, where readers like balance between like criticizing their audience and calling for unity. You want to note like where does that shift happen? And then lastly, clarify vague pronouns. If there's a bunch of it's, you want to make sure you're understanding what it is referring to. That's called the antecedent. Or if it is she, he, they, just make sure you know what it's tracking. So if I'm doing pencil paper, I circle it and I just draw a quick line to the antecedent. That way I'm not getting confused when I have to go back and reread it. It takes me 5 seconds, but it saves me time if I have to go back to that line. Now, let me take a moment. I see another question in the chat. But before I do that, let me take a moment to talk about if you're annotating and you're doing this digitally. I don't even know, to be honest with you all, like what and how easy the tools, if any, will be on the College Board exam website. Like I said, this is a bit of a weird mystery year. So what I'm having my students do, my students are taking the exam digitally, all of my students. And the reason for that is we've been digital most of the year, so they've had practice typing their essays and barely any practice handwriting them or writing them out by hand. So if that's you, if you're taking it on the second or third administration, if you're taking it digitally, I still want you to annotate because the pros are so great. Now, I would not mess around with trying to do that on the computer. I would have a loose leaf sheet of paper out in front of you, and just every paragraph, or maybe you could be like lines 1 to 10, paragraph 1, whatever, however you want to write it down. Just jot down those same things you would. You won't have any underlining. That's okay. You might want to say line 10, super important. Whatever you want to do, but do annotations quickly. Like time matters. You want to hit the ground running. It is not okay for you. Like you want to hold yourself to a high standard. So you do not want to be like waking up during the test. And the reason why that matters is multiple choice is first. You just got to make sure the moment that you start the exam, you are at your best. You don't want to be like waking up and like hitting your groove like halfway through the multiple choice because that means it didn't go well, right? That's worst case scenario is you're not ready to go from minute 1. Because you got to use every minute, especially on what we're talking about today, these readings. Okay, let's talk about this question in the chat. So great question. let me be really clear about this. The question is tips for approaching difficult to understand text, which are typically older text. Absolutely correct. Kind of what I'm saying, annotations hold you to a high standard, and there's no secret sauce. If there was, I promise you, that's what we'd be talking about on Fiveable. We want to get to like the best tips and strategies. We'll talk about some tips and strategies, but the best way to get better at older texts is to practice reading older texts between now and May 11th. And obviously, you've been practicing them throughout the year. So you are better today on April 10th than you were on September 1st, right? That, like, if you've been in AP language, that is just the truth. You have gotten better. So everybody's at a different skill with reading. To be honest, when I was a junior in high school, this some of these older passages would have destroyed me. I read them with confidence now, but I mean, I've been teaching AP language for 10 years and I went to college and studied English. So, the more time you invest in it, the easier it goes. With that said, like, because I can't fast forward you in time, like, if I could go and take this test now as someone who's taught the test, or taught the course, it'd be so much easier for me than when I was 16, 17 years old. But we're taking this now as juniors. Most of us are juniors. There's some sophomores, there's some seniors who take the test, but no matter how old you are, it's all about the skills that you have. So let's say, okay, I know that I've got to practice a lot. I know the more I read, I got, so I'm going to read. But what do I do though? Because it's still not going to be like easy on May 12th. The biggest thing to do is to chunk the text into pieces that you do understand and then see how the chunks relate to one another. So for example, if there's a paragraph that's 40 lines long, because I do figure out, or I have seen that a lot of the older texts have some really long paragraphs, and the longer the paragraphs are, I think the harder it is because you have to identify the shift in topic or tone. So shifting it down to be like, okay, the first two sentences I understand. The third and fourth sentences I don't. I've read it 3 times. You just have to move on. But as soon as you can ground yourself into that fifth or sixth sentence and be like, okay, how do the two pieces that I do understand connect to each other? Is she changing topic or is this still the same topic? So you just want to break it down to the smallest parts as possible, but then see how those little pieces relate to one another. And Brandon, as I was talking, typed pretty much the same thing. We're very aligned. Brandon's a great AP language expert as well. So he's saying, yeah, break it down into these small pieces. And again, annotations like can ground you like, okay, I know what to write because I understand this small piece. You are going to see some difficult passages. So do not get stressed and in your own head of like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening. Calm down, take a breath, and go figure out the pieces you can understand. Okay, great question. It's like maybe the hardest question to answer because there's no secret sauce, like I said. But practice, 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 and practice doing it this way by annotating, and you'll gain confidence as you go. Okay, everybody. We're going to get into practice. We are about halfway through our session already. Had a couple good questions, lots to talk about. Now let's get into practice. So this is the one from the course and exam description. Honestly, this is like a pretty normal passage. It's kind of mid-tier difficulty, not the hardest you'll ever see, not the easiest. So it's a great one to practice. And like I said, it's on the topic that's probably most frequent on AP language for whatever reason, right? This is about the women's suffrage movement. Let's go ahead and begin. So if you're doing this digitally, you would have a piece of paper out and you'd be jotting down these annotations. If you're doing this pencil paper, you're just jotting down annotations in the margins. They'll have room for you. What we're going to do today, I will read each paragraph. Follow along with me because we're not going to read it twice. We're just going to read it once, and I'll read it relatively slow so you can kind of process as I'm going. I'm not going to read it like obnoxiously slow, but I'm not going to speed read it. The first couple slides, I have annotations. The next 4 slides, you're going to write the annotations in the chat, and I'll like pull 1 or 2 of yours to jot down just so you can get some practice in this. This is our only multiple choice reading practice day, so we're going to practice annotating. We'll do it pretty quickly. And then we'll practice the 8 questions. Let's get started. Again, they didn't give us like a big blurb like they normally do, so we're just going to start. But normally there'd be like 3 sentences to just be like, here's the author, here's the topic, that kind of thing. But I'm telling you the topic, it's women's suffrage movement. So let's jump in. And it's from a woman. It's from a woman writer. Okay. If I were a man and I said to you, I come from a country which professes to have representative institutions and yet denies me, a taxpayer, an inhabitant of the country, representative rights. So that's a quote. Hypothetical, if she was a man, you would at once understand that the human being a man, was justified in the adoption of revolutionary methods to get representative institutions. But since I am a woman, it is necessary in the 20th century to explain why women have adopted revolutionary methods in order to win the rights of citizenship. So this is how we're jumping in. Um, Let me annotate, and then I got a good question in the chat that we should be talking about. I appreciate the questions. The more questions you all ask, the more it kind of guides my talking points. Like whatever you need to know or are thinking about, please let me know. But the first annotation that I would jot down, and by the way, this because they're slides, I'm a little bit more thorough than I even would be if I was writing them down like under a timed setting. So you would even be briefer with your annotations. You do not want to take a lot of time actually writing annotations. You just want to jot them down quickly and have them to lean back on during the questions. So the first one, men recognize injustice when it impacts them, because she starts off with, if I were a man. And then it says, okay, for the rest of her essay, she's going to explain why women have started to adopt revolutionary methods. I would do that a lot quicker. I would just say, will explain revolutionary methods. Like I'll know, okay, this is talking about her as a woman. I see that in the last sentence here. Got a good question. Let's talk about before we go to the next paragraph. Should the author's main idea be our main focus for multiple choice? Absolutely yes. So for rhetorical analysis, you have to make sure you understand. I appreciate the question because this is a great thing to think about. From multiple choice reading, you have to focus on just the main idea. For rhetorical analysis, you have to lean on the main idea because if you don't understand the main idea, you really can't do much, right? But an added layer that you're looking for and thinking about as you're reading is, okay, who's the audience and why is the author saying what she or he is saying based on this audience? So we're thinking about like, okay, what are the writing choices the author's making? Now, there is a lot of overlap. So you might be thinking about that as you are reading this passage, like, okay, this audience seems to be a man or men that she's talking to. So you're thinking about that, but you really just should be annotating for the main idea. That's really all you need to do. The trend is this. Multiple choice reading passages are more difficult, just language-wise, than rhetorical analysis passages. That's the trend. Now, I've seen multiple choice passages that are easier than some rhetorical analysis passages, but that is the trend, that these will be a little bit harder to understand. So you'll have some more like just comprehension-based questions around them. Great question. So yeah, for today, we're just annotating for the main idea. Okay, I've got one more that I'm going to provide annotations for. Let's read it. You see, in spite of a good deal that we hear about revolutionary methods not being necessary for American women, because American women are so well off, most of the men in the United States quite calmly acquiesce in the fact that half of the community are deprived absolutely of citizen rights. And we women, in trying to make our case clear, always have to make as part of our argument and urge upon men in our audience the fact, a very simple fact, that women are human beings. Now, my rhetorical analysis ears are perking up of like, I know what I would start analyzing. Like, this is a pretty interesting writing choice. She's like stating the fact that the obvious, women are human beings. Of course, the men know that. So I'm like thinking about that, but let me just annotate for main idea. American women often are told to stop complaining because you're well off, like you've got it fine. What are you complaining for? You've got it better in our country than anywhere else in the world. Like that's an argument they would have heard. But she's like, hey, women are human beings. And then I have other thoughts there, like I said, like, okay, what would the men be thinking here? Why does she like state the obvious? How does that fit into her argument? But for my timed reading of this, which obviously today is not timed practice, but if I was doing it, I'm just quickly writing down the main ideas here. Quick side note before we continue, I would do a blend as you're practicing of skill building and timed practice. Obviously, you'll read better under not time constraints than you will under time constraints. But you want to practice both. And if you are running out of time and don't have time to do a bunch of multiple choice practice, prioritize timed practice because that just gets you ready for the exam the best way you can. All right, so the more timed practice that you have, I think the better you'll get at timing and just figuring out like how long to spend on each question, that kind of thing. 17 or 18 minutes, remember, per passage with about 12 questions each. Now, I hope you're ready to engage. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm going to read the paragraph. I'm going to have everybody who's participating just put in the chat 1 or 2 annotations that you would write, and I'll copy 1 or 2 of them in to be our model for the slide. All right, let's read it. It is quite evident. You, remember I said I think she's talking to men, you do not all realize we are human beings. Or it would not be necessary to argue with you that women may, suffering from intolerable injustice, be driven to adopt revolutionary methods. We have, first of all, to convince you we are human beings. And I hope to be able to do that in the course of the evening before I sit down. In other words, while she's giving the speech. But before doing that, I want to put a few political arguments before you, not arguments for the suffrage, because I said when I opened, I didn't mean to do that, but arguments for the adoption of militant methods in order to win political rights. Now, you might need to go back and reread a sentence or two, but go ahead and put in the chat, what would you annotate here based on my last 2 slides? Just quick little main idea annotations are what we're looking for here. I already got a couple. Thank you, everybody. I'll give you 1 minute, and then let's choose one to put in for our model here. I got a question before, as I was reading that, about like how often we should refer back to annotations. My question or my answer to that is pretty much every single question. It's just easier to reference my annotations than that big old paragraph. So if it's going to direct me to a line, I always go back and look at when I annotated for that line or that paragraph as I go. So we'll do a little bit of that practice today. Okay, so that's a good question. We'll actually practice that together. Let me write down one of your annotations. And again, because we're typing, like we're not doing practice today, so these might even be a little bit longer than what you would do on the real deal. I'm just going to use this. Never feel like, oh, I didn't get chosen. I'm not the best here. I'm not necessarily choosing the best every time, just one that I can do quickly that is really accurate. So women are human beings. They have a right to revolutionary methods, just like men do. Okay, go back into presentation mode and let's do the next one. We've got, just so you can kind of see where we're at, 1, 2, 3, 4 left before the questions. So this isn't too long. Okay, a great many of you have been led to believe from the somewhat meager accounts you get in the newspapers that in England there is a strange manifestation taking place. So we're talking about, it actually wasn't clear from the beginning because we didn't get a little blurb, but we are in England, not the US. But these movements were pretty much happening around the same time in history. Okay, so we're talking about in England. Let me start at that. That in England, there is a strange manifestation taking place, a new form of hysteria being swept across part of the feminist population of those isles. And this manifestation takes the shape of irresponsible breaking of windows, burning of letters, general inconvenience to respectable, honest business people who want to attend to their business. It is very irrational, you say? Even if these women had sufficient intelligence to understand what they were doing and really did want the vote, they have adopted very irrational means for getting the vote. We only got 4 more slides, so we're going to take a minute each time, and then we'll get to the questions. I'll give you 1 minute to try to get your annotation into the chat, and I'll choose one that I think works really well. This is just our time to deliberately practice this type of reading. So 1 minute, I already see a couple annotations in the chat. Go ahead and do that. I see them coming in, and they're all looking on point. So if I don't choose yours, but it's pretty close to the topic, that's fine. The whole point is you put this in the words that help you understand it. You don't want to use words from the prompt that are hard to understand. Like you want to look at your annotations and in 5 seconds remember what this paragraph is about. All right, I'm gonna start to type one here. Ben, Nicole, I'm using yours. Ben convinced that women are irrational in their methods. Everyone, it's looking on point. Julie, I just see yours is pretty similar to the one that I wrote for Nicole's. So yeah, we're feeling pretty good about this. Let's do the next paragraph. So she's basically, some of you just said she's addressing the counter argument. Yeah, she's saying, yeah, you men think that this is the problem. This is what you're hearing in the newspapers. Newspapers are complaining about our actions. Okay, now she's going to probably, let's see if I'm right, address those concerns. This is actually, by the way, the same paragraph, because I didn't indent here to show that. I just split, this is a shift in topic or tone. So these long paragraphs, you as the reader just determine, okay, I'm going to write a new annotation here because even though it's the same paragraph, she's doing something a little bit different. Okay, let's read this one. How are they going to persuade people that they ought to have the vote by breaking their windows, you say? So again, definitely addressing the counter argument there. She's like putting words in their mouth. Now, if you say that, now she's going to address it. Like I said, it shows you do not understand the meaning of our revolution at all. And I want to show you that when damage is done to property, it is not done in order to convert people to women's suffrage at all. Here's why it's done. It is a practical political means, the only means we consider open to voteless persons to bring about a political situation which can only be solved by giving women the vote. Okay, let's take 1 minute to get those annotations into the chat, and we'll, again, choose one to just type up on the slide. All right, we'll do about 20 more seconds. I see a bunch of them coming in right now. I like what Leah said here. If you see it towards the bottom of the chat, I'm going to say men are wrong. Just a little like right to the point on that one. Women are being extreme because it's their, I'm just tweaking your words a little bit, their only option, right, to get the right to vote. Great job. Okay, we're going to do one more. Oh, my bad, two more. Okay, suppose the men, this is our second to last one. This is a long paragraph, and then we got one more. Suppose the men of Hartford had a grievance, and they laid that grievance before their legislature, and the legislature obstinately refused to listen to them or to remove their grievance. What would be the proper and the constitutional and the practical way of getting their grievance removed? Well, it is perfectly obvious at the next general election, when the legislature is elected, the men of Hartford, in sufficient numbers, would turn out the legislature and elect a new one, entirely change the personnel of an obstinate legislature, which would not remove their grievance. It is perfectly simple and perfectly easy for voting communities to get their grievances removed if they act in combination and make an example of the legislature by changing the composition of the legislature and sending better people to take the place of those who have failed to do justice. Okay, everybody. That one kind of wordy. You might need to go back and reread. I'm not going to do any of that myself, but you can see the slide. So I'll give you about a minute again. Go ahead and once you reread any part you need to, give me that annotation in the chat, and we'll move on to the last one after that. About 30 seconds. I'm going to type in one of your answers for one of your annotations. A lot of you are focused on this. I tweaked your words, Gregor, but I used yours. I just added women versus men versus as opposed to you versus we. It really doesn't matter what you write. It matters that it's helpful for you. So I just put if women had the right to vote like men, their problems would already be addressed. Let's do the last one. But let the men of Hartford imagine that they were not in the position of being voters at all, that they were governed without their consent being obtained, that the legislature turned an absolutely deaf ear to their demands. What would the men of Hartford do then? They couldn't vote the legislature out. They would have to choose. So, just like we talked about in the previous paragraph, she's saying, hey, put yourself in our shoes. What would you do if you couldn't vote, if you didn't have this right? So, they would have to choose between two evils. They would either, evil one, have to submit indefinitely to an unjust state of affairs, or evil two, they would have to rise up and adopt some of the antiquated means by which men in the past got their grievances remedied. In other words, she's saying, we have two options. They're both evil. We don't have a good choice. She's acknowledging we don't like that we have to fight in this manner, but it's the lesser of two evils. So I kind of gave you some stuff to think about, or just to kind of put that in my own words. But go ahead and do this for the final time. One last annotation here, and then I'll put one in the chat. That will leave us 10 minutes to work on some multiple choice practice questions. Today was more of just like gaming, thinking about how to practice. So 10 minutes for actual question practice here after this annotation. Go ahead, though, everybody. I got a few good answers so far. He's kind of inferring this, but it's a pretty strong inference. I'm kind of taking two of yours and putting it as one. The men would act violently too. Absolutely. Some of you are probably still typing, so 20 seconds to finish up what you would annotate. If you would like to send them in the chat, go for it still. But then I'm going to move on to the first question. We have 10 minutes left to do 8 questions. Okay, let's look at question number 1. This is one we'll practice, and we'll have to do this pretty quickly. But we will have to practice when to go back to annotations, like somebody asked about. This first one, and oftentimes the first question that you get, you will not have to practice, you will not have to flip back to annotations because it'll be like what I call the big picture question, such as what's the primary purpose of this passage? Here's this one. Which of the following best describes the writer's exigence in the passage? Remember, exigence is the reason for writing the work. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up a poll. If you ever think the answer is E, just type that into the chat because this is not an AP friendly poll. It doesn't let me do 5 answer choices. It's so not looking about AP students, right? But look at A, B, C, and D. If you think it's E, just put that in the chat. You have 45 seconds to make your choice, and then I'll show you how we did. Don't have to go back to annotations, just have to think about the passage as it's fresh. You have 15 seconds to get your vote, your voice heard. 5 seconds. And put your vote in now if you want to. Let's look at how we did. You should see the results on the screen. It's looking a little weird. So let me tell you, if it's hard to see on yours, I'm not actually sure. My screen's kind of hard to see the result. So 2 people put B, 10 of you put C. C is correct. Let's just look at it. The growing trend, B, of using violence to address women's employment concerns. That's part of it, but she's not writing because of the violence. The violence comes into play, but she's writing because of the limited resources available to women. So she's just saying, hey, we really want to make this change. So B is the second best answer. C is the best answer because violence is just part of the problem, or like part of the solution, actually, you could say, to the problem. Okay, let's look at number 2. So like I said, the answer number 1 is C. In the opening paragraph, so I'm going to flip back to our annotations. I'm going to just go back on my slide. In the opening paragraph, the writer contrasts a hypothetical rhetorical situation with her own, primarily to. So what I would do before you even look at A, B, C, D, and E, flip back. So let's go to the first paragraph. Where's that hypothetical? If I were a man and I said to you, I come from a country which professes to have representative institutions and yet denies me a taxpayer, you would at once understand that a human being was justified in the adoption of revolutionary methods. So you would understand that you would have to fight for your rights if you didn't have them. Okay, let's go back and look at the answer choices now. I'm going to open up number 2's poll. Why does she use that? Hold on, let me open it up. Okay, think of the answers, and I'm going to get that poll open. I got to do something real quick. But why does she use that hypothetical? Have your answer in mind. Vimeo, which is what we're using to stream, is being a little glitchy with this poll right now. So we might have to use the chat if I can't get the poll to work. Okay, here we go. Number 2 is open. Go ahead and vote. Thanks for being patient with me on that one. Let's just do 10 seconds to get your votes in, since lots of think time on that one. All right. Get your votes in now if you want to be part of the poll. showing the results again. I'm not sure if you can see. So all but one of us put A. A is correct. Illustrate the double standards of men and women. There we go. That's better. That's better. Okay, so 91% of us put A. Let's go ahead to the next one. We're not going to have time for all 8. There's a couple that would take too long to do today, but I'll still tell you the answers and walk you through them. But number 3, we can do. So again, I'm going to read the question, go back to my annotations for lines 11 to 30, and then you choose A, B, C, or D. In the second paragraph, which of the following best characterizes the writer's position on the relevance of her topic for women? Let's pretend I'm scrolling back up to the top of the page. Here we go. My annotations. American women often are told to stop complaining because they are well off. And then she says, but remember, women are human beings. This actually continues the second paragraph. Women are best human beings. They have a right. Sorry, I should just say women are human beings. They have a right to revolutionary methods. That's when we started annotating together. So just think about that. This is all paragraph 2. Okay, I'm going to open up a poll for number 3. And you have 1 minute to do it. There, it's a little easier to see now. Okay, so we're pretty much in agreement that this is E, which is me. We're not using the poll for this one just because of the poll's limitations. So let me read E. Although American women are perceived as well off, they should nonetheless consider adopting the methods. Here's my point. So we actually are kind of running out of time for these other questions of practice, but we've almost all got 3 for 3 so far. We invest our time in reading up front, and then these questions go pretty quick, right? And we're doing really well. So again, you want to spend about 7 or 8 minutes doing what we did today. We took a little bit longer as we were talking through it, annotating, and then the questions go well. Now, here's what I think is the best use of your time. As opposed to me quickly going through the questions, you will be able to just access these slides immediately after this event is over. Brandon is also hosting some office hours. Like I believe, Brandon, let me know in the chat if anything changed immediately after this. So if you want to just practice on your own, that's probably the best use of your time as opposed to me quickly telling you the answers. The way these slides are set up, the answer is right after, so you can see it. So it's a nice way to just go through these. So there's 5 questions left. If you want to do those on your own, optional, totally up to you. What I wanted to spend our focus on today was just like getting in the right frame of mind for how to tackle these types of questions. Hopefully you're on board with, yeah, if I understand the passage, if I annotate well, I can quickly flip back and forth and answer these questions well. So let's actually pause it here. Again, not to cut off the last 5 so you can't access them, but that way when you do practice, it's more authentic. If I tell you the answers now, it's actually not going to be the most respectful use of your time because when you practice them, you want to be able to practice them pretty authentically. So you may log off and then shift over to practicing now or just take a break if you want to. I'll stick around to answer any questions in the chat. So I see one coming in. Thanks for good practice today, everybody. I appreciated the time together. Hopefully you can come back on Wednesday as we do the composition ones. We'll have more time to actually practice those. because the reading will go a lot quicker. Okay, so we will talk about number 3, D versus E. Let me read D. Let me talk about how to differentiate the two. And again, you feel free to log off if you got this right and you feel happy about it. If there are questions, I will stick around to answer them all. You're welcome, Nicole. All right, everybody, have a good day. All right, somebody's helping you out in the chat. Let me look at it. So although the methods described by the writer are best suited for American men, American women could adapt such methods for use in the domestic sphere. Yeah, the domestic sphere is basically like use the men's methods so you can be a better stay-at-home wife and mom. So that's the incorrect part right there. Domestic means like homely. Yep, exactly. So that's the clue. All right, everybody. Again, you can always email me if or talk to Brandon about 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This is a great practice one. Sorry we didn't get to all of them today. Again, wanted to take time answering questions and that kind of thing at the beginning. All right, another question. In a rhetorical analysis, could the hypothetical situation used as a rhetorical choice be one to be discussed? Yep, absolutely. Brandon beat me to it. Absolutely. Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks for your time today. If there's any more questions, please let me know before we close it out. Cool. It looks like we are wrapping it up then. Again, if you practice 4 through 8 on your own and have questions, let either Brandon or I know. We are always around to help. Hopefully I'll see you Wednesday. Have a good rest of the weekend, everybody. You're welcome. Bye, everybody.